Today I'm going to talk about a game that's definitely a classic, Starfleet Battles from Task Force Games in 1979. This is the first edition designer's version. And this is kind of my go-to game to play when it first came out. The one I did was there's also a second different cover version of this, which is more modern looking. The Star Trek universe, tactical battle between ships of the various, Federation and different empires. So the cover, this version is kind of like a comic book kind of version, which personally I like because you don't get this kind of art anymore with all the like photoshopping or whatever. I kind of like how authentic it is, and it definitely points to like that 70s vintage kind of look. I really appreciate that. So it's a bookshelf game. Good samurai on the back. Could you command a starship? The challenge of starship command: outthinking, outshooting, and outmaneuvering your opponent in a warp speed dogfight. Your crew lives or dies in your skill and cunning as you turn to bring your strongest shields and most powerful weapons towards the enemy. An enemy that might be another starship, a massive robot berserker, or an alien that dwarfs even your massive ship. The typical ships included several different ones. Here's a sampling, like the Federation heavy cruiser, Klingon D7 battle cruiser, Kzinti attack shell carrier, but several different other variations. Over 200 playing pieces, representing the Federation, different types of ships, Klingon ships, Gorn ships, Romulans, Tholians, Orion Razors, and Kzintis. What differentiates this from the previous versions? The Deluxe Designer's version was edition, which this is. The previous ones were, pocket games that came in a plastic, wrapper. So in this Deluxe Designer's edition, it's out from the original, and it's got a revised expanded rules, movement, combat, and heavy allocations, or ship classes. You get over 200 counters, a 20 by 24 inch tactical map, rules of play, game charts, displays. And of course, there's all sorts of different expansions that go with this, that are in this universe. Includes 12 scenarios, and actually there's 5 Solitaire, which is nice. 2 campaign games. Playing time, they say 30 minutes to an hour. I think that's like pretty optimistic. Our games would go like several hours. Moderate complexity, that's about right. Credits: game design, Stephen V. Cole. Game development, Barry Jacobs. Developmental playtestings, and additional design material developers. Producer, Alan D. Eldridge. Graphics counters, Alan D. Eldridge. SSD sheets, Alan D. Eldridge, Arvan Spuck, Steve Wilcox, Stephen B. Cole. Cover painting by A.J. Bellflower. Playtesters and consultants. Of course, it's based in the original series Star Trek universe, so you have all that great background information. In the rules, it also has this nice chronology of events to kind of give you a sense of it. So with a reference year 1 where first contact between human race and the nearest neighbors, the Orions, Vulcans, etc. Year 4, the formation of the Federation. 40 to 46, the first Romulan War between the Federation and Roman Republic. 45, introduction of the cruiser design. 46, the Romulan ceasefire. 5882, the first Kzinti War. 62, Federation begins conversion of cruisers to warp power. 62-67, all races develop warp-powered ships. 71, Federation Starfleet is formed. Member races beginning disbanding their national fleets in favor of the unified fleet. 82, Klingons win first Klingon-Kzinti war, depriving Kzintis of 3 key colony planets. 110, 111, first war between Federation and Klingon Empire. 113, Federation completes disbanding the national fleets in favor of the unified Starfleet. 16 remaining starships mutiny and disappear. They form the Orion Pirates. 123, 131, the third Klingon-Kzinti War, inclusive results. And then 150, 170, primary time frame of the game. It is interesting how they talk about when the warp drive was developed in the timeline. I'm curious how that matches with the current view of that universe. And it's got a nice reference map here of the different races. There's a brief primer here on the backgrounds of the different races. Kzinti hegemony is originally composed of Kzinti homeworlds, and from their initial worlds they expanded to control several other worlds with native sentient species. Klingon Empire rose from the ruins of the previous one, known as the Old Kings, of which they had been a subject race. Tholians are an aggressive race, but they don't want any intrusion into their territory. Of course, Federation, you know about them. Orion is in the Federation, but there's some pirates. Gorn Confederation consists of 3 sentient races, but they developed on separate planets, but they're fairly similar to each other. The Romulans are viewed as the most aggressive. Components. First, the rulebook, 48 pages, black and white, goes in a lot of detail for both basic and advanced rules, and talking about scenarios. And there's various charts and tables in the book, including the Type 1 offensive phaser table, Type 2 offensive defensive phaser table, Type 3 point defense phaser table, Type 4 heavy phaser table, photon torpedo chart, disruptor bolt chart, plasma torpedo warhead strength table. And then for the different fleets, you have the ship type, crew units, boarding parties, breakdown cost specs, spare shuttles. And of course there's a lot of other information sprinkled in the rules as well. And then here's the damage allocation chart, where the die roll, and then the systems that are hit. Then you use these to track play. These are energy allocation charts, where you, of course, allocate your energy where you allocate energy during the different movement turns. Then it comes with these different standard ship designs, which you would, photocopy them off during play. You see the different components, the locations of them, and boxes to mark off when you have damage to them. There's a Federation Command Cruiser, Federation Heavy Cruiser. When you have 2 different ones, the grayed out ones are used for one of the larger of them, and then you don't use the grayed box for the smaller of the 2 options. You got the Gorn Heavy Cruiser, Gorn Light Cruiser, Romulan War Eagle, Romulan Warbird, Base Station, Klingon Battle Cruiser, D7 or D6 class, Romulan KR class, Federation Dreadnought, Kzinti Strike Cruiser, Kzinti Light Cruiser, Federation Light Cruiser, Klingon E4 escort, F5 frigate, Romulan KF-5R class, Klingon C8 or C9 dreadnought, Kzinti frigate, Kzinti attack shuttle carrier, Federation scout, Federation destroyer, Federation starliner, Federation tug, Federation battle pod, Orion pirate raider, Tholian patrol cruiser, small freighter, large freighter, Gorn destroyer, and then starbase. And it comes with over 200 counters. They're pretty well done for the time. Standard half-inch by half-inch, standard thickness, and the graphics work fine. Couple dice. It doesn't come with a tray, but I always often use the GMT trays that fit perfectly in these bookshelf boxes. So this tray doesn't come with it, but it's a good thing to add in to organize your stuff. So that's all the counters. Here's unique counters. They're all one-sided. So first of all, the color coding deals with the different races. So for all the counters, there's a designator of what it is, and then there's the number. There could be several cruisers, for instance, so there's numbered, and then the image of what it is. And the various ships would correspond then to the ship sheets. So the color coding for the races, the Federation ships are black on blue, Klingon are white and black, Kzinti are black and white, Gorn are red and white, Romulan is black on red, Orion is white and blue, and Tholian is white and red. So for the Federation, we have a battle tug, heavy cruiser, command cruiser, light cruiser, destroyer, dreadnought, freighter, shuttle, scout, and transport tug. For Klingons, a boom, which is detached from a Klingon ship. C8 and C9 are two classes of the Klingon dreadnought. D7 and D6 are two classes of the Klingon battle cruiser. ES is a Klingon escort. FF is a frigate. S is shuttle. And then for Kzinti, attack shuttle, light cruiser, strike cruiser, shuttle carrier, frigate, shuttle, Gorn, heavy cruiser, light cruiser, destroyer, shuttle, Romulan. KR is a Klingon battlecruiser in Romulan service. Warbird, War Eagle, shuttle. Orion is a raider cruiser and shuttle. And these over here are a star base, base station, and freighter. And these are different weapons. And there's various planets, and then asteroids or debris, and various monsters. So here's the map. It's 20 by 24, and my understanding is the different versions might have different, colors of background. Game scale is Distance across a hex is 10,000 kilometers. Movement at speed of 1 hex per turn is equal to the speed of light movement. There's 2 directional indicators which go into movement rules here and here. Then we'll get into the rules. Going through the rules here, I'll talk in detail about the basic game rules, and then I'll just touch on the advanced and optional rules and the scenarios, because there's plenty in there in the basic rules. Sequence of play: energy allocation phase, speed determination phase, self-destruction phase, drone and shuttlecraft launch phase, sensor lock-on phase, impulse procedure, and within that the movement determination segment, movement segment, fire decision segment, fire announcement segment, fire segment, damage assessment segment, and then the plasma torpedo launch phase and the record keeping phase. So that completes 1 turn, and then it's repeated for the number of turns in this scenario. Energy allocation phase: each player for each ship he controls fills out the next column on the energy allocation form for that ship. It's by the allocation of energy the players determine this phase what the speed of their ships will be during the current turn and what current equipment and weapons will be operated. Speed determination phase: the speeds of all ships as well as drones, shuttles, and plasma torpedoes are announced or determined. The controller prepares his control sheet. Self-destruction phase: ships which are plotted to self-destruct do so at this time. The effects of the blast are applied immediately to any ships within range of the blast. Drone and shuttlecraft launch phase: players that plotted to launch drone or shuttles do so within the limits of the appropriate rules. Sensor lock-on phase: all ships which wish to fire at enemy ships during the current turn or which have drones on the map targeted on other ships must attempt to achieve a sensor lock-on at this time. This is resolved with a single die roll for each ship attempting lock-on for all the ship's potential targets. The effects of the lock-on or failure to lock-on will last for the entire turn. A given ship will either have a lock-on to every other ship on the map or none of them. Note that in the case of ships that have not suffered sensor damage, lock-on is automatic. Impulse procedure: the movement combat portion of the turn is divided into 32 impulses. Any impulse on which no ships or weapons are to move is skipped completely. Movement determination segment: the ships that will move in the current impulse are determined by the controller from the movement chart. Movement segment: each player whose ship is to move in this impulse moves it 1 hex in accordance with the pre-plotted movement. Homing weapons have special rules for movement. Fire decision segment: players determine for each of their ships if it will fire any of its weapons during this impulse. This is done secretly and simultaneously. Fire announcement segment: players announce for each of their ships if they will fire, and if so, which weapons and which targets. Fire segment: weapons are fired. Damage assessment segment: after firing, damage is calculated and recorded on the SSD sheets. The impulse procedure is repeated for each impulse of the current turn. When all impulses are completed, return to the sequence of play. Proceed with the plasma torpedo launch phase. In the plasma torpedo launch phase, players who had previously plotted to fire plasma torpedoes on the current turn do so by placing the counters for these torpedoes on the map on top of the firing ship and facing the same direction as the firing ship. Energy allocation. Part of the game is the energy allocation rules. Here players must determine how much power energy is available and how to use it most wisely. Energy is calculated and allocated on an energy allocation form. Specific instructions for filling out the form are given on a line-by-line basis as follows. 1. Warp engines. This is the amount of warp power available. Simply count the unchecked warp energy boxes on the ship's SSD. Impulse power. This is the amount of power available from the impulse engines. Again, simply count the number of unchecked boxes. Reactor power. This is the amount of power from nuclear reactors. Total power. This is the amount of power available from all sources other than batteries. Batteries available. Batteries discharged. This is the number of batteries which have previously been used. The total of 5 and 6 will always equal the number of undestroyed battery boxes in the SSD. At the beginning of the scenario, the batteries will all be charged. Careful players save their batteries until the ship is heavily damaged and use them to fill in temporarily for destroyed engines. Life support, you must allocate 1 unit of energy to this line in each turn. However, if your ship has taken internal non-shield hits equal to 50% or more of its original system boxes, you may declare the ship to be put on emergency life support, which requires no energy. Fire control scanners. 1 unit of power will operate scanners and sensors for the current turn. If no power is allocated to this line, weapons may not be fired, and any drones and suicide shuttles launched by your ship, which are on the map, are removed. Phasers. 1 unit of power will operate 1 laser. Exceptions, Type 3 point events. Phasers use 1/2 unit of power each. Type 4 base phasers use 2 units of power each. You may put on this line as many units of power as you have operational phasers. Each specific phaser may fire only once per turn. Phasers may not be fired or energy allocated to fire them on future turns until they have been energized. This requires 1 turn and 1 unit of energy for the entire ship, not each phaser. Unless specifically stated otherwise, all ships begin all scenarios with the phasers not energized. If a period of 25 turns elapses during which no phasers are fired, they must be re-energized. To energize phasers, simply allocate 1 unit of power on this line on turn 1. After phasers have been energized, they still must have power to fire. You may allocate to this line on any given turn sufficient energy to fire all of your ship's phasers. You may allocate less, but never more. Each time a phaser fires, this energy is reduced by the amount of energy used. At the end of the turn, any unused energy may be held over to the next turn or used to recharge discharged batteries. Note that if during the course of a turn enough phasers are destroyed to reduce the number of phasers that have not fired that turn below the amount of energy allocated for the phasers, the surplus energy is lost. Torpedoes. This line is used for photon torpedoes, plasma torpedoes, and disruptor bolts. The allocation of energy for each launching tube is recorded separately on one line here. Specific method of allocation for each weapon type is covered in the rules of the weapon type. Shields. Shields may be set for a minimum level, which requires 1 unit of power but provides only 5 shield boxes on a ship's SSD. Any damaged boxes of a shield are part of these 5. Shields may be set at maximum level, in which case 2 counts of energy must be allocated and all shield boxes of all shields are activated. General shield reinforcement. Any amount of power may be applied here. Divide the amount applied by 2 and the resulting number is the number of extra shield boxes for that turn. These shield boxes reinforce all shields. Reinforce shields. Energy may be added directly to one or more specific shields. This may be done to reinforce a weakened shield or to reinforce one that you expect will be facing the enemy on a coming turn. Each unit of power allocated to a specific shield provides 1 extra shield box in the SSD for that turn. This box is not drawn as SSD. Simply mark the energy allocation form when that shield is hit to reflect the reduction of this reinforcing energy. These extra boxes are destroyed first before boxes on the SSD are checked off. Movement. Each unit of energy placed in this line provides the starship with 1 movement point. A starship which has allocated 16 units of energy in this line will move 16 hexes during the current turn. Damage control. This line is used to allocate energy using the optional damage control rules. Recharge batteries. Energy allocated on this line will recharge previously discharged batteries. 17, 18, 19. These lines are used to allocate energy to miscellaneous systems, not specifically listed above. Examples of these would be electronic countermeasures, electronic countermeasures, tractor beams, transporters, and shuttles. Total power used. Batteries discharged. This is the record of the number of batteries which are discharged on the current turn. It is used to adjust lines 5 and 6 on the next turn. Movement must be plotted for starships and shuttles. The intended launch of any drone, shuttle, or plasma torpedo must be noted in the lower portion of the column of each turn. Movement is recorded using the letter codes in the upper right-hand corner of the map sheet. Note, except when specifically stated to do so, energy does not carry over from turn to turn. And then movement. Starships move on the map by impulse power and warp engine power. The movement of most ships in the game varies from turn to turn depending on the amount of power which is allocated on any given turn for movement. Each hex moved into during the course of a given turn equals 1 times the speed of light. Players in the game select the speed of their own ships during the energy allocation phase by how much energy they allocate to movement. They are limited in this choice by the rules, which limit speed to a maximum of 31 hexes per turn, damage taken by the ship in previous turns, the requirements of allocation, the requirements of acceleration, movement expressed in movement factors. Each turn during the energy allocation phase, each player for each ship records in line 14 with energy allocation form a number of energy points. This is the number of movement factors a ship will have that turn and the number of hexes that it will enter during that turn. All energy used for movement, with the exception of 1 point, must come from warp engines. The one non-warp engine energy point used for movement must come from the impulse engines. The Romulan warbird is the only ship in the game to have no warp engines. It can never move faster than 1 hex per turn. The base station and starbase, including the game, can never move. They may, at the owning player's option, rotate 60 degrees clockwise per turn. The fastest allowable speed is 31, even though some ships can go faster. No ship may plot more than 31 hexes of movement. Ships may use higher speed when using the disengagement procedure. Romulan plasma torpedoes move at a speed of 32 and are the fastest moving objects in the game. Each ship will move 1 hex and 1 hex only during each impulse in which its movement is called for by the movement chart. If a player allocates 16 units of energy to movement, then a ship will move 1 hex in each of the 16 impulses that turn. Ships normally move directly forward, turning 60 degrees right or left as their turn mode permits. Ships may, however, also move backwards using exactly the same turning procedure. Ships may not mix forward and reverse movement during a single turn. The direction the ship will be traveling for the reverse must be noted during the energy allocation phase. Before a ship can reverse direction, however, it must pay a braking energy cost equal to its current speed. This energy must be warp energy, except 1 point that may be impulse. After paying this braking cost, the ship may be given sufficient energy to move at any speed, albeit in a reverse direction, with the acceleration limits to its original speed. Each ship in the game which moves at translate speed more than 1 hex per turn on a given turn must maneuver within the limits of its turn mode. The turn mode is the number of hexes which the ship must move in a straight line, straight ahead, before it can turn 60 degrees, 1 hex side and right or left. After each 60-degree turn, the ship must again move the stated number of hexes straight ahead before it can turn again. Turn modes increase with speed. Also, less maneuverable ships have higher turn modes. Turn mode chart. Players operating ships which can move at translate speeds do not wish to move at translate speeds may either move in a normal movement or use technical maneuvers. When using normal movement, a ship with only 1 movement point moves on the last impulse of the turn and is assumed to have a turn mode of 0. It may turn 60 degrees and move 1 hex directly ahead. Alternatively, the players may write tack in this movement plot. In this case, the ship does not actually move in. It remains in the hex it is in, but on any impulse after the first impulse during which counters are moved, it may make 1 60-degree turn. Only 1 such maneuver is permitted during each turn of the game. All movement must be plotted at the start of the turn during the energy allocation phase. Homing weapons do not plot their movement, they home in on their targets. So in hex 403 there's the letters A through F around. It's a innate and indicating ship movement. Movement is recorded using abbreviations as follows. 2A would mean 2 hexes in direction of A, 3C would mean 3 hexes in direction of C, The actual act of turning the ship by 6 degrees is done at the start of a given impulse, and not at the end of the impulse. The actual movement of firing weapons is done during the impulse procedure. Each turn is divided into 32 impulses. Movement at translate speeds is not the appearance as movement, but rather the warping of space around the starship. As is the case, there is no need for periods of acceleration as such. However, the energy conversion and transmission systems of the ships cannot suddenly change from standing to 500 times the speed of light. When allocating energy to movement, the player may increase the ship's speed by a number which is equal to the previous turn speed, or 10, whichever is greater. Disengagement. Procedure: on a given turn, the starship wishing to disengage must move at the maximum possible speed which it can, as restricted by available engine power and the game-imposed speed limit of 31. At the end of that turn, if the starship in question still has a total warp power available equal to either 50% of its original power, rounding fractions up, or 15, whichever is lower, the owning player simply announces that he is disengaging. This scenario is then over. If at any time a given ship is not within the range of any operable enemy weapons and is faster than every enemy ship on the map, then the ship may, at the owning player's discretion, be deemed to have disengaged, even if it has not satisfied the requirements. The range for a drone is assumed to be 24 hexes. Movement procedure: during the impulse procedure, various ships on the map, including shells, drones, and plasma torpedoes, are moved by a proportional movement system. In simple terms, that means if Ship A is moving at 10 hexes per turn, Ship B moving at 5 hexes per turn, then the turn is divided into a number of impulses. Then Ship A will move twice as many impulses as B. During the course of the game, one player assumes the duties of controller. These duties consist of reading the movement chart and informing the various players when their ships move. Movement chart. Stacking. Players are permitted to freely stack counters within a given hex. Each counter is still treated independently for all purposes. Fire into a hex is directed at one and only one counter within that hex, with the exception of mines. Combat. Combat takes place during the impulse procedure for each turn. Combat consists of firing weapons at the ships of the opposing player. Weapons are divided into two types. These are seeking and direct fire. Direct fire weapons include phasers, disruptor bolts, and photon torpedoes. Seeking weapons include drones, plasma torpedoes, and in some cases, shuttlecraft. Nuclear space mines are treated as seeking weapons, even though they do not actually move or follow their targets. Direct fire weapons are fired during any impulse of the impulse procedure. Their effects are determined and recorded immediately upon firing. Two ships firing at each other during the same impulses are presumed to fire simultaneously. Each direct fire weapon may be fired only once per turn, and then only if they have satisfied their requirements for energy. All direct fire weapons have a definitive field of fire which is shown on their SSD. The effects of each such weapon are shown in the various weapons tables. The number of hits scored by a given phaser on a given firing depends on the type of phaser, the range, and the die roll. Photon torpedoes and disruptor bolts either hit or miss their targets. Phasers disrupt across target in minute arcs, and how much of this arc actually touches the enemy ship determines the amount of damage. The damage caused by each hit or miss varies in the case of disruptor bolts, but is constant in the case of photon torpedoes. There is no counterweapon to a direct fire weapon, but shields will reduce the damage it causes. During impulses which are skipped because no ship is being moved, no weapons are fired. Seeking weapons are represented by counters on the map which follow their targets. They are launched either before or after the impulse procedure. See the individual rules for these weapons. The effect of the weapon depends on the power assigned to it. Drones and shells, which are just kind of drone, have a fixed amount of power, while the explosive power of plasma torpedoes decreases with range. Seeking weapons can be fired by phasers and possibly destroyed or reduced in effect before they hit their targets. Generally, each damage point, also referred to as hit points in hits, will check off one box on the target ship's SSD. The target ship will not, thereafter, be able to operate the system represented by the destroyed box. Procedure: damage points scored must be allotted to the systems on the target ship's SSD by the following procedure. Determine shield hit. All hits are presumed to first hit shields. Shields have 6 shields, one facing each of the 6 surrounding hexes. In recording damage, the first step is to determine which shield was hit. Armor. Some of the ships, including the game, have armor installed in their hulls. Hits which penetrate the shields are assumed to strike the armor. Interior hits. Any hits which penetrate the shields and armor are distributed among the interior systems of the ship by the damage allocation procedure, which uses the damage allocation chart. Damage allocation chart procedure. First, determine the number of hits which penetrated the shield and armor, if there is any armor. Each hit must be distributed individually. All hits scored against a given shield and a given impulse must be resolved together and are collectively known as a volley. For each hit of the volley, roll 2 dice and find the resulting number in the die roll column of the damage allocation chart. Look across to the right of the die roll result and note the system listed in column A. Normally, the hit in question is scored against one box of that type. Players must allocate each hit of a given volley by the procedure. However, if there are no remaining boxes of that type on the target ship's SSD, move one column to the right and score the hit against the system listed in column B. If there are no remaining boxes in B, move to column C and so on. When there are no excess damage boxes remaining and one additional excess damage hit is scored on the ship is destroyed. At the instant of destruction, the ship is removed from the game. The entire crew is assumed to be perished. All drones on the map lose their tracking guidance and removed, and the ship is considered destroyed for victory purposes. Plasma torpedoes, which were fired by a destroyed ship, continue to track their targets and operate normally. They are self-guided weapons. If using the optional rules on self-destruction, the ship is assumed to explode in the hex it occupied at the instant of destruction with the force of the explosion calculated. Note that some of the results on damage allocation chart are printed in bold type. These results are treated specially. A given bold result can only be scored one time in each volley. In the case of hits against phasers, the hit is scored against a phaser that is capable of firing the direction from which the volley came. If such hit cannot be scored against a weapon bearing in that direction, it is then and only then scored against the system in the next column of the damage allocation chart. The result torp on the damage allocation chart is applied to the disruptor bolt, photon torpedo, and plasma torpedo boxes and SSDs. Glass box on the sensor, scanner, and damage control tracks is never marked as destroyed. This represents the residual capability existing if a system has been effectively destroyed. The damage records of the SSD are not secret. Any player may examine the SSD of any ship at any time. This is unlike the energy allocation forms, which are secret. Each box within a group of 2 or 3 boxes representing a phaser bank is a separate phaser which may fire independently at different times at different targets. Explanation of the firing diagram. The diagram below the diagram is used to designate the firing angles of all ships in the game. It is repeated in each SSD. The area around each ship is divided into 6 firing hexes, shown here, LF, RF, etc. Then there's different groupings of them, like for instance FA would be LF plus RF. Ship system rules. Each of the small boxes in each ship system display, SSD, represents a system that the ship can operate in the performance of its mission. These systems are described below. Control systems. Each ship contains several control systems. These represent the ability of the captain to control a ship. If all control systems are inoperable, then the control of the ship is impaired. The following systems are control systems: bridge, emergency bridge, auxiliary control, and flag bridge. If all control systems on the ship are destroyed, the following restrictions apply to the ship in all subsequent turns. One is added to the turn mode at all speeds. Tactical maneuvering during the ship, but not moving it, is allowed only in the last half of any given turn. The ship may fire weapons at only one target in any given turn. All firing by the ship in any given turn must be done in a single impulse. This may be any impulse, however. The ship may not use emergency deceleration, tractor beams, electronic countermeasures, or launch Wild Weasel shellcraft. Sensors. Sensors are the reconnaissance systems of a ship. They are used to detect other ships and to lock on to target ships. Sensors are used to detect other ships at the start of the scenario. Any time new ships enter the map, to determine if the ships have been detected, roll 1 die. If the die roll is equal to or less than the highest number on the sensor track, the attempt has been successful and the new ship has been detected. Note that as all damaged ships have a sensor rating of 6, detection is automatic. When playing some of the campaign scenarios, it's possible to begin a scenario with sensors. If the opposing ships are not detected, their colonies are not placed on the map, and they are moved secretly. The ship which was not successful in locating its adversaries may make a new attempt on each turn in the sensor lock-on phase. If you have not detected another ship, when that ship fires at your ship, you have automatic sensor detection at that instant. Ships must have a lock-on to their target to fire their weapons with their full effect. Ships roll for lock-on in the sensor lock-on phase for each turn. A ship either has a lock-on to every potential target on the map or to none of them. Roll a single die. If the result is equal to less than the highest unchecked number in the sensor track of the SSD, the lock-on is achieved. Note that all ships have a 6 on their first box of the sensor track, and until damaged, sensor lock-in is automatic. If lock-on is not achieved, then the following restrictions are placed on a ship which fails to achieve lock-on. The failing ship may not launch drones at the target. Any drones on the map launched by the failing ship are removed from the map. Firing range to all targets for other weapons is doubled. The doubling refers to true range, not the range after being adjusted for scanners. Plasma torpedoes may not be launched. Ships which have launched drones must attempt to lock-on every turn that they have drones on the map. Failure to achieve lock-on causes the drones to lose tracking of their target, and they are removed from the map. No ship may have more drones on the map than the highest number of the sensor track. During the course of the turn, the sensors on a ship are damaged. The number of drones on that map must be reduced to the new sensor rating immediately. Plasma torpedoes may not be fired unless the firing ship has achieved a lock-on of the target. The lock-on is required only at the beginning of the turn, during which the plasma torpedo is launched. It need not be held during the turn in which the torpedo is actually moving toward its target. Scanners. Scanners are the weapons setting systems of the ship. They are used to aim and fire all non-seeking weapons. The scanner adjustment factor is the lowest numbered undestroyed box on the scanner track. This is initially 0 for all ships. When computing fire range, always add the scanner adjustment factor to the actual range in hexes. Hull. The various boxes marked hull represent various non-critical parts of the ship. These include such things as crew quarters, gymnasiums, etc. While damage in these areas is not particularly desirable, it does not materially affect the ship's ability to participate in combat. In practice, hull hits are free hits. Lab. The laboratory boxes indicate the ability of the ship to conduct scientific experiments, gather information. In the monster scenarios, these labs can be used to gain victory points. In combat with other ships, however, they in effect become just free hits. Armor. On ships carrying armor, any hits which penetrate shields are scored against armor. When all the armor boxes are checked off, hits which penetrate shields are scored against interior systems, just as they would be in ships which do not have armor. Probes. Probes are primarily scientific instrument packages. They are used to gather scientific information. Probes are used only against certain types of space monsters. In all other cases, the probe box in the SSD is just another free hit. Probes launched for informational purposes cost 1 unit of energy per turn for 2 turns to launch. The second turn of charging may be the turn of launching. Probes are used only in a scenario when a probe is launched, it gains 20 factors of information as detailed in that scenario. Probes may be used as antimatter bombs, again only in the specific scenario. The probe is not sufficiently accurate to be used against other starships. If used as an antimatter bomb, probes require 3 units of warp energy and engine energy for each of 3 turns, the last of which must be the turn of launching. The probe can be fired at any time during the turn. To determine if the probe has hit the target, roll 1 die. If the die roll is equal to or higher than the range in hexes, just for sensor lock-on scanners, the probe has hit the target. Probes have a maximum range of 6 hexes for all purposes. All ships have 5 probes. The box in the SSD represents the probe launcher. Then optional rules for systems. Some systems are governed only in the optional rules. These include shuttlecraft damage control, transporters, tractor beams, and security stations. We're now using the optional rules in Section 3. Hits from these systems are simply free hits. Phasers. The phaser is the primary weapon of most starships in the game. Types of phasers. Type 1, offensive phaser. This is the most powerful type of phaser carried by starships, causing considerable damage, up to as much as 10 hexes. Type 2, offensive defensive phaser. This type is carried only by Kinglon ships and KR type battle cruisers. They are shorter range than the offensive type, but are intended for use in defending the ship against drones. Type 3, Point Defensive Phaser. This type of phaser is the least powerful of all, having an effective range of only 1 or 2 hexes. They are designed to be used only against drones. Type 4 Heavy Phaser. Very powerful model used only on star bases and base stations. Players should refer to phaser tables for the effects of these weapons. Phasers are fired during the combat portion of any impulse. The fire is assumed to reach the target ship virtually instantaneously. The given ship may fire any number of phasers in a given impulse. Players must allocate energy in the energy allocation phase to be able to fire their phasers. It takes 1 unit of energy to fire 1 phaser. The exceptions, the Kzinti point defense phasers require only half unit of energy to fire. Also, shuttlecraft do not use energy allocation procedure. They are presumed to always be able to fire their phaser. Photon torpedoes. Photon torpedoes are carried only by Federation ships. They must be armed in advance and cost a considerable amount of energy to hold in launch tubes if they are not fired immediately. Each photon box on a Federation ship's SD represents 1 photon launch tube. To arm a photon torpedo, 2 factors of energy must be allocated to a specific photon torpedo tube on each of 2 consecutive turns. The second turn may be the turn of firing. If the arming of a photon torpedo has been completed at a given turn and the torpedo is not fired on that turn, then the ship must allocate 1 unit of energy for that tube for each turn until the torpedo is fired. The 4 points of energy to arm a photon torpedo must all come from the warp engines. The 1 unit of power to hold it may come from any source. Photon torpedoes are fired in the impulse procedure, and their effect is determined immediately by die roll. There are no counters for photon torpedoes. The photon torpedo chart is used to determine the photon torpedo has hit its target. Regardless of range, a photon torpedo does 8 hit points of damage if it hits. A Federation ship may not begin a scenario. If photon torpedoes in its tube, it may not begin to arm photon torpedoes until a hostile vessel or monster has been sighted. Disruptor bolts. Disruptor bolts are carried by Klingon and Kzinti ships. They work basically on the principle of energy discharge. Each DIS or boxing SD represents 1 disruptor bolt firing point. Each is recorded and fired separately. Disruptor bolts are fired much the same way as phasers. 2 units of energy are allocated for each bolt, which is to be launched. Any bolts for which energy has been allocated but which have not fired by the end of the turn are lost. Energy to fire disruptor bolts can come from any power source. Disruptor bolts are fired during the impulse procedure. There is no counter for a disruptor bolt. Their effect is determined by die roll and recorded immediately. The number of hit points scored by a disruptor bolt is determined by the range. Refer to the disruptor bolt chart. A given disruptor bolt may not be fired more than once per turn. Plasma torpedoes is used by the Romulans and by the Gorns. Each box and SD represent 1 plasma torpedo tube and can fire 1 plasma torpedo. Each plasma torpedo requires 2 units of energy on each of its 2 consecutive turns, and then 5 units of energy in the 3rd consecutive turn. This is a total of 9 units of energy. Maximum firing rate is thus 1 shot per tube every 3rd turn. Romulan ships must fire the plasma torpedo in the 3rd turn. Gorn ship may hold a given plasma torpedo in the launch tubes at the energy cost of 2 units per turn. This may go on indefinitely. The energy to fire a plasma torpedo may come from any power source. If a plasma torpedo has completed arming in a given turn, it may be fired in that turn. Decision to fire is not made until a plasma torpedo launch phase, which is at the end of the turn. A Romulan ship with an armed torpedo must launch it during this phase. A Gorn ship could elect to hold it, paying the energy cost on the next turn. Plasma torpedo is represented by a counter. During the plasma torpedo launch phase, the counter for the plasma torpedo is placed on top of the firing ship, facing the same direction. The plasma torpedo will, in the next turn, move exactly as if it were the ship, except that it does not plot a path. It homes on its target. During each impulse that the plasma torpedo is to move, it may be moved in any way as long as it moves closer to its intended target if this is possible. Plasma torpedoes have a turn mode of 1. Romulan plasma torpedoes have a speed of 32. Gorn plasma torpedoes have a speed of 20. Both remain on the map only one turn. If they have not hit their target by the end of the turn, they are removed from the map. At the instant that a plasma torpedo enters the same hex as its target, it explodes. Its strength is dependent on the distance traveled and the damage to the warhead caused by the phasers. The hit points are scored against the shield facing the direction approach. Plasma torpedoes may be fired at only by phasers, just as any ship may be. Every 2 points of damage by phaser fire reduces the warhead strength by 1. Destruction of the plasma torpedo box and SSD destroys the ability of the ship to produce new weapons, but not its ability to fire the one it has already created. No, plasma torpedoes are the only weapons that are fired at the end of the turn. At the time of the firing of plasma torpedo, the player firing it must designate a target. The target must be somewhere in the 120-degree arc in front of the firing ship. If no target is in this arc, the torpedo cannot be targeted. Sensor lock-on is required to fire a plasma torpedo. Plasma torpedoes may be distracted by a wild weasel shellcraft. Drones, they are launched by a starship, which has a sensor lock-on to another ship, and then home in on that ship. Drones are carried on drone racks. Each drone rack contains 4 drones. The Kinglon BC may release only 1 drone per turn from either rack. The Kinglon BC has 2 drone racks. Kzinti may release 1 drone from each of its 4 drone racks. The sensor strength of the launch ship has an effect on the number of drones that may be on the map at one time. Drones are launched in the drone and shuttlecraft launch phase of each turn. When launched, the drone is placed on top of the launching ship, facing any direction at the option of the launching player. The target ship for the drone must be announced in this phase. Drones move at a speed of 8 and turn mode of 1. They home in on their target, moving in each of their impulses in any manner as long as they move closer to their target. The drone remains on the map for 3 consecutive turns. If it has not hit its target or been destroyed by the end of the turn, it is removed from the map. Drones may be fired only by phasers and are destroyed if they take 4 phaser hits. It requires no energy to launch a drone. When a drone enters the hex of its target, it explodes with a strength of 12 damage points. Hit points are scored against the shield facing the direction of approach. Warp engines. Each box in the cluster boxes an SSD, which are marked warp engine, represents 1 unit of power. Impulse engines. Each box in the cluster box of an SSD marked impulse represents 1 unit of power. Impulse power can be used for any function except those activities specifically requiring warp engine power. Auxiliary power reactors. Each auxiliary power reactor, APR, box on the SSD represent 1 unit of power available from the auxiliary power reactors. Reactor power can be used for any purpose not specifically requiring warp engine power. Batteries. Each box on SSD marked battery, or BTTY, represent the capability to store 1 unit of energy for later use. All batteries of all ships are presumably to be fully charged at the beginning of all scenarios. Batteries may be drained when extra energy is needed and charged when extra power is available. No battery may hold more than 1 unit of energy. Shields. Each ship is surrounded by 6 shields. They are numbered 1 through 6, and each shield faces one of the 6 surrounding hexes. The shields are fixed in position and cannot be rotated or moved. If given a shield is down, it is down until repaired by damage control. No other shield can be shifted into position or expanded to cover a double arc. The number 1 shield will always be to the front of the starship. If a given shield is completely down, it cannot be individually reinforced, although general reinforcement would still be effective. It is important to determine which shield has been struck by incoming fire. To do this, you just draw a line from the attacking ship to the target ship. If 2 ships are in the same hex, the firing directions are judged for both shields and weapons purposes from the 2 positions occupied the impulse before the impulse in which the ships occupy the same hex. In certain situations that can arise where the shield hit becomes difficult, players are advised to resolve the situation with common sense, guidance principles. The shields are represented as SDs by the rectangular groups of boxes surrounding the ship. These are marked Shield 1, etc. Each hit in the shield checks off 1 box. When all boxes of a given shield are checked off, the shield is down. Hits scored on the shield that is down penetrate to the interior, with the exception of armor. That's completion of the basic rules, and then there's optional rules, which I won't go into detail, but there's security stations in Klingon Mutiny, shuttlecraft, critical hits, alternate shields rule, damage control, tractor beams, transporters, recharge boarding party, emergency deceleration, self-destruction, unvoted combat, super intelligent computers, boom separation in the Klingon battlecruiser, auxiliary drone racks, electronic countermeasures and electronic countermeasures, cloaking device, nuclear space mines. And then it talks about the starship types and classes, which are represented on their SSDs. Then scenarios for the basic game. Set scenario format is number of players, setup, length, special rules, victory conditions, or battle variations. And there's scenarios. There's a introductory scenario for 2 players. Fleet action scenario. 2 sides. The Planet Crusher, which the creature that ate Sheboygan 3, monster number 1. I think I'll be doing that one because of my interest. Number of players is Solitaire. Space Amoeba, monster 2. Base defense. 2 players. Sabotage scenario, surprise reversed. And campaign games, I won't go into detail. Sublight game, first Romulan war. Advanced game rules. Mass-based movement. Movement energy requirement chart. Alternate movement, pre-plotted. Tactical warp maneuvers. Energy turns. Probably a breakdown chart. Advanced rules for shuttlecraft. Kzinti advanced attack shuttles. Drones, advanced rules. Photon torpedoes, overloads, disruptor overloads. Plasma torpedoes on Gorn swivel mounts. Klingon and frigate booms. Ubitron interface modules. Different pods. Brian Pirate special rules. And different firing arcs. Folian web device. Stasis fields, tractor beams, ground bases, planets and asteroids, and more discussion of the starship types and classes for the advanced game. Talking about ship design, scenarios for the advanced game, which I won't go into those. And we'll get into setup and play. So this one of these games have Solitaire scenarios. So I'll be doing Solitaire scenario, which is 48, the Planet Crusher, the creature that ate Sheboygan. But from a distant corner of the Empire comes word that something is destroying entire planets. It's 1 player, and the monster is controlled by automatic rules. Initial setup. The Planet Crusher, monster number 1, in hex 0233, 1 planet, which we'll call Sheboygan 3, in hex 2502. 1 more ships in hexes 4214 through 4217. Facing it at the option of the player. Speed on previous turn was the maximum for the ship type. Length of the scenario. Scenario continues until either the monsters destroy the planet or the starships have destroyed the monster. Special rules. The monster moves by special automatic rules. As mission is to destroy the planet, the monster will always move, unless distracted by the ships, towards the planet. In cases where the monster may move into either of 2 hexes, both of which are toward the planet, the player may roll die, odd numbers going left and even numbers going right, toss coin or simply alternate. The monster has a speed of 6 hexes per turn. If at the beginning of any impulse, a starship is within 2 hexes of the monster will begin to follow the starship. And the first time during a given turn that the monster detects is within 6 hexes of a starship, it will fire its weapon. This operates as a phaser but uses a special chart below. So die roll 1, damage 40, and then it goes down to die roll of 6, damage 1. Range has no effect on the result, but the weapon is limited to a range of 6 hexes. If the monster is within range of the planet, you'll fire at the planet. The monster can fire its weapon only once per turn. The weapon has a 360-degree field of fire. The monster has a turn mode of 0. The monster also has a close-in defense system, which has 4/6 of a chance, use a die roll, of stopping any drone fired at it. This is determined when the drone was moved adjacent to the monster. If there are no ships within detection range, the weapon has not fired on the current turn, and plasma torpedo moves within 2x of the monster. It will fire its weapon at the plasma torpedo. The monster moves adjacent to the planet. If the monster moves adjacent to the planet, it will cease movement unless it moves to follow a starship. Victory conditions. Monster wins if it can inflict 200 points of damage to the planet. The player wins if it can inflict 200 points of damage to the monster. Order of battle variations. Players should feel free to use any ships or combinations of ships in the scenario. So we'll do the setup. So there's the monster in the starting location, the planet where it's located, Sheboygan 3, and the Federation ship. I decided to use a Federation destroyer. There's a chance I'll be outgunned by the monster, but we'll see what happens. So I'll start him over there. And then here's the system diagram for the Federation destroyer. Again, since it's the destroyer, use the gray boxes as well. And here's the energy allocation chart. And I'll just keep track of damage to the monster on there as well. So I'll be using a 20 impulse movement chart since the speeds won't be going above 20, so it's useful. And the monster has a movement of 6 and turn mode of 0. When I do the initial allocation, it was going at its max speed before, but now, so what he's doing is, he's got 19 total power, 2 available batteries, but he's not going to discharge those. He has to apply 1 for life support, 1 for fire control scanners if he wants to use weapons, initially 1 to energize the phasers. If he wants to use the torpedoes, 2 to arm them, and then the next turn he can put some power there to fire them, but can't be fired yet. He's just arming 1. Out of the 4, he's just arming 1, since he's still a ways out. 1 for the shields, and that, by having 1 for the shields, he's just having 5 of the boxes active on each of the shields. No general reinforcement. So that's a total of 6 points. So you take that away from 19, you have 13 movement. So the destroyer, at the speed of 13, you then go to the turn mode chart, and Federation destroyers, which are going 10 to 14, have a turn mode of 3. So I'm not going to plot the movement since it's Solitaire, but that would be, he's going in the F direction, so it'd be 3F. One chart. So the monster is going at 6, and the Federation destroyer is going at 13. So go to this chart here. So on the first impulse, nobody moves. On the second impulse, destroyer can move. Go forward 1, he can't turn yet. Yeah, I'll just put a counter here to indicate which one we're on. That's helpful. Go to third step. No movement. Fourth step. Federation goes 1 more. And the monster can move. He's moving towards the planet. 5th step. Destroyer moves. And he can turn next time. So there's no phasers going on yet. Check the distance here though. They're 38 away. Next step. It doesn't move. Next step. He moves. He's going to change his facing, and then we move forward one. Monster can move. A movement. Destroyer moves. Destroyer moves. Let's keep going straight. Although he can start turning now. Step 13. Step 14. Monster moves. No movement. 16. He'll here. $17. Moves forward. And at speed 13, no movement. Or speed 6, no movement. 19. Destroyer moves. He won't change his facing yet. Monster doesn't move. Last step. Just keep that same facing. And monster moves. And now the range is 23. So on the second turn then for the energy allocation. There's no damage yet, so he's got all his power. It's not going to discharge any batteries. Still needs one for life support, one for firing his weapons. And then he said he's going to have one phaser active because he's going to be putting a lot of power to photon torpedoes. So the first one, he has two for the second turn now, so this torpedo tube can fire a torpedo. These other three are just arming, so they can't fire yet, but he has to decide to put two in each of these because he's starting to close in closer. He wants to go to max shield, so he moves it up to 2. So that gives a total of 13. So subtract that from 19. Gives him a movement of 6. And you're allowed to either change your speed as much as what your speed was the previous turn, or 10, whichever is greater. So that's within that range. But he's going down the same speed as the monster now. And then since his speed is 6, his turn mode would be 2. And then since his speed is 6, his turn mode for the destroyer would be 2. And since the speeds are both 10 and under, they'll just go the 10 impulse chart here to make it simpler. They're both moving at 6. And he can fire his phasers or photons at any time during the movement, but he'll wait till he gets closer. And I'm assuming he doesn't know what the range is of the monster yet, but the monster can't do it until he's within 6. And then you determine if the ships are detected and if they can lock on, but since there's no damage yet, there's sensors at a full 6, there's no chance that that's not going to be successful, so he's good there. Then movement. They're both moving at 6. First impulse, no movement. Second, they both move 1. And they're not going to change their facing. It's not going to fire his weapons yet. Third step. Neither of them move. Fourth step. Both move. Fifth. They both move. Kind of just going head on here. 6. They don't move. 7. He's still holding off. He's not using his phaser or his photon torpedoes yet. Just waiting until he gets closer. They both move in. 8. No movement. Next. Check the range here. 14. So a range of 14. They'll get within 13 next. Oh, they'll get within 12 next turn. But whether it's 12 or 14, it's the same chances for the phaser. And chances do get better for the photon when he gets one more. So he'll fire his laser now, fire his phaser now, and the next turn he'll fire his photon. So it's in his firing arc, so he'll go ahead and do that. Do a die roll. 6. Unfortunately, he misses. Then they'll both move their last turn. Now they're within 12, and he can fire his 1 photon torpedo. The other 3 are still being armed, but he can fire one of his photon torpedoes. At a range of 12, he'll hit on a 1 or 2. 2. He hits. Regardless of range, the photon torpedo does 8 points of damage. So the monster has 8 points on him now. He'll indicate that one was fired. And it's not within 6 yet, so the monster can't fire yet. Then we'll go to the next turn. So for his allocation, he's going to... So he's still got 19 total power. He's not going to discharge any batteries. He needs 1 for life support, 1 for fire control. He's going to power all his 4 phasers. And then 3 of the photon torpedo tubes. He's going to put 2 there so that he's able to launch that. And then for the other one, he's going to rearm that one so that in the next turn they can fire that. So that gives them a total of 16 points, and which results in a movement of 3 that he can do. And the monster's still going at 6, of course. So the first one, nobody moves. Second one, monster moves up 1. Nobody moves. Monster moves up 1. Federation moves up 1. Check the range. 8, 9. The monster moves up. They're in a range of 6 now. So the monster might pummel him. If he gets a 1, damage is 40. If it's a 6, 1, 2. 30 points damage. We'll see how that plays out here. Turns out it may not have been wise to go directly at the monster face on. So it's going to go to his front shields. So 20 are taken out by the shield. There's no armor. So 10 hits are going to go in there. And we'll see where they end up. We look at the damage allocation chart. Roll 2 dice. 3. Takes out a drone. So we start with column A and work our way right if it's not there. So there's no drones. Since there's not a drone, then we do a phaser. And since it's bold, it can only take out one phaser. So that's one hit. The next, 11, torpedo. So it can only take out one torpedo since that's in bold. Then we have 8 left. 8, a hull. Okay, let's get a free hit. So we have 7 left. 5. Right warp engine. Take that here, so it's just the center one. Can only take out one of those. 7. Cargo. There's no cargo, so front hull. 5 left. 7. Hull again. Take one off this side this time. 8. A hull. 6. Another hull. 12. Auxiliary control. Can just lose one of those because it's in bold. Then the last internal hit. 9. Left warp engine. Since it already bolted out the right warp engine, I'm assuming you can't do any more warp engines. Then it goes to a hull. And that's all the damage, which was significant. So to be fair, damage is simultaneous in a given impulse segment, but it's not beyond that. So he was going to wait for most of his stuff till he got closer. So I'm going to say he's not going to fire all the stuff now, but he will fire some. I'll let him fire his torpedoes, and then he'll wait till he gets in a little bit closer to do his phasers, but he'll lose one of his phasers. He's within 6. So for the photon torpedoes, you hit a range of 6. You hit on a roll of 1 to 3. Let's see how many of those 3 torpedoes hit. Miss. Hit. 2 of them hit. Photon torpedoes do 8 points damage regardless of distance. So that's another 16 to the monster. So he's got 24 damage now. At this point it looks like the monster's in a little bit better shape. And he doesn't know if the monster can fire more, but it turns out the monster can fire more. It can only fire that one time. But we had a couple more movements to go, and he's going to get a little closer for his remaining phasers. He only has 3 remaining phasers now. So next movement. Nobody moves. Monster moves. He's going to head up towards the planet, directly this way. His firing arc is 360 degrees anyway. They both move. He moves up here, and he moves in. So now the range is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's got, so he lost one of his phasers, so he's only got He's only got 3 left, but his phasers are set up so he has 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side. He lost 1 on the left side, so at least he's oriented now so he can fire with his fire bank on the right side. So he can fire 2 of his phasers since the other one isn't in that firing arc. So for his 2 phasers, in a range of 5, die roll, 5, 3 points, 2 points, so a total of 5 points on the monster. So the monster's got 29 points in damage, but I'd say overall the Federation Destroyer regrets facing the monster head on. The Starfleet Battles from Task Force Games in 1979. This is the Deluxe Designers Edition with the kind of older cover. You know, I did kind of a simplistic example of one ship versus a monster. There's a lot more enjoyment that you get when you're doing it in several players. You might have different ships, different abilities. That's where it gets more interesting, but at least you're able to see the mechanics of how it works by doing it against a monster. It is nice that it has the Solitaire scenarios, and it obviously tied into the entire original series, Star Trek universe. It's just check off boxes, but you can decide, which way you're going to orientate your ship, and which weapons you're going to fire where you're going to allocate. So that's the biggest part of the fun, is to make your choices in allocation, so you can use your tactics against your opponents. Obviously, just all sorts of replayability. You can get different ships and different allocations, different opponents, a lot of different scenarios. You can do it with several different opponents. And there's all sorts of expansions that go with this as well. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Thanks a lot.